Why the hell does Iowa not have an offensive coordinator? This is the next segment. Let's do a quick roll call of noteworthy offensive coordinators that have been hired in this cycle. Andy Kotelnicki at Penn State was the leader of the Jayhawks' 28th nationally ranked total offense and 434 yards per game. Very exciting offensive scheme, and the potential of Penn State seems to be off the charts. Jeff Grimes, KU, the offensive coordinator for Baylor team in 21 that averaged 31 points per game and was a Broyles Award finalist. Jonathan Brewer for Duke coached the 14th ranked SMU offense to 465 yards and 40 points per game. Brian Lindgren at MSU, Michigan State, retained as Jonathan Smith's offensive coordinator from Oregon State with the 32nd ranked offense with 426 yards per game and 33 points per game. And then Colin Klein at Texas A&M did really well at Kansas State. Like, what is happening here as the portal is coming and going? Iowa has had a head start, maybe a 2-year head start, depending on how you want to look at it, to try to get somebody here. Why is this taking so long, and is this coaching malpractice?
No, this is a different type of situation than where you have at the other places. Now, Colin Klein, I think, might have worked at Iowa, but I think when you look at this right now, Iowa is really strapped when it comes to the portal. They are now at officially 86 scholarships going into next year, and so they're waiting on some NFL decisions. But there are a couple of coaches right now under heavy consideration, and one of them is Joe Philbin, who coached at Iowa a million years ago, but was the offensive coordinator for Green Bay, head coach of the Dolphins. And then the other one is Paul Chryst, who coached at Wisconsin. And those are two that are probably the most prominent guys under consideration. And I think the thing is with an Iowa versus everybody else, Iowa can fill the vacuum left behind in some ways by Wisconsin by going to an offense that has 90% 11 personnel. If it leans into what makes it successful, or had made it successful when it did average 31 and almost 32 points a game a couple of years ago, which is
play action,
better run game, and certainly a passing scheme that's not from 1991. And I think that's what either of these coaches can bring to Iowa is a better passing system with better depth, with better route running. And Deacon Hill trying to run Sean Lewis's up-tempo offense is a non-starter. I'm probably better than that.
Well, Scott, I have to ask.
But anyway, it's different. But I think Paul Chryst, if he was the hire, would be really good.
About Syracuse, right, Dave? The two names that you mentioned, and Tony Yayo here, one of our loyal listeners, mentioned it, are old white guys. I don't know if that's just the only way that this is going to work at Iowa, but is it possible that we're going to find out that Brian Ferentz wasn't the problem next year?
Yes and no. Part of the problem has been execution and lack of the player development. When they were successful a few years ago, they had first-round draft picks on the offensive line and tight end, and they actually do have some who are injured now. So I think Brian is very good when it comes to run game coordination and less good when it comes to pass game coordination. And I think having all the injuries they did on offense really stunted any kind of ability for them to get out of that big hole that they were in. And I would say that, to push back a little bit on the theory, I mean, half of their coaches are African-American, some significant ones, as I mentioned. So they have a role in doing this. Now, Joe Philbin and Paul Chryst, for instance, I think one thing that they've got to do is work with what Kirk Ferentz wants to do, and that is play complementary football. And it may bore the hell out of some people, but it actually, when this team's winning 10 games, and I know next year it's going to be an open division, but you can't tell me that Washington coming to Iowa City is going to be something that they're going to be able to walk through, because I've seen so many teams come to Iowa City and get their ass kicked that I think that it's just about, can they run the ball effectively? Can they play action pass? Can they move the ball down the field? And if they score 31 points like they did in 2020 or 2018, then this team will be just fine where it is.
They cannot. If they hire Joe Philbin, listen. I just like the guy hadn't coached in college, in an on-field role at least in 20 years, and 1 year as an analyst at Ohio State. Just the college game and the pro game are so different, and especially if you're not going to bring in a new system where you have some new ideas and some new blood. I'm not even sure what they would be running, there. You could say quote unquote pro style. Okay, but the defensive schemes are totally different and the athletes are totally different. I think we hear the term complementary football. When I hear that term, that just means, well, our offense isn't very good, but we can still do some stuff. And it's just seems to me like a faulty way to try and build a program.
You need to watch
especially when you're not in the Big Ten West anymore.
All the totals in the NFL on Sunday were in the 30s. The Steelers, there's a lot of teams that play like Iowa in the NFL. I think that
there's not a lot in college.
But I do, and Catherine here brought this up, Scott, and it's an interesting thought because I had it myself. When you said what's Washington going to do when they go into Iowa next year, probably exactly what Penn State did. If you have top, and maybe not next year's team, but if you bring in a team that has a very good quarterback and top level receivers, you need to do something to answer that, because Iowa's defense is excellent. I think Iowa's defense is also shown when you're playing against a high-powered offense with a ton of very good players on it that there's only so much you can withstand before the dam opens. And I just think that it's if you're going to play this way, then you are basically resigning yourself to saying what they did this year, which was freaking remarkable. I was texting you about it a few weeks ago. All the Iowa jokes aside, the team literally won double-digit games, played in the Big Ten championship game, and came close to even covering that game. They played their asses off in the Big Ten championship game. So, I don't think that Kirk Ferentz is a bad coach by any stretch of the imagination because of just what he was able to do this year, in spite of a problem that I think you could partially, if not solely, blame on him. But, I think there was this thought process that Iowa was going to recognize that they could play complementary football while also being open to offensive innovation. I don't think that you have to run 3 tight end sets out of the pro style under center formation in order to play smart football that gets first downs and play complementary football. It doesn't have to be boring 60-year-old man coming up with the plays. I don't know if it's just me, but does that make sense to what I'm saying? Can't they try to do something somewhat new that just gives their athletes a chance to do more in space and maybe acquire better athletes that are excited about running the offense? Or does it just have to be a team that is better at getting first downs, but not necessarily scoring in order to win these games? I don't know. Maybe Iowa only has one way to go here, and that's to try to duplicate what they just did. But is there something else that can be done here, or is it just is what it is?
I'm going to lose my mind.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. It's not going to be they're not going back to the Big Ten championship game ever again if they average 16 plus point, 16 points a game. They know that. They also know that you can't average 250 yards a game and hope to win 10 games again, because that's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. They can play this style of football and be much better on offense. But the thing is, are they going to be able to go out and recruit the athletes in Iowa to be able to execute at a high level? I think they could do what Iowa State does and be effective, but I don't think they could go out and do what TCU did with Max Duggan and be effective. I think it's a matter of how do they leverage what they have, their strengths, play to those strengths. Because, and then, when we start to talk about age, I don't like to be ageist. I think people can execute plans, because I think sometimes people get too fired up over 4 wide receiver sets and 3-3-5 defensive packages, and we're all like cats chasing a laser pointer. It's about winning games. And if you win the game, if you're physical and the other team isn't, you're going to win that game as long as you can execute. And Iowa's problem has been that they've thrown 36 touchdown passes the last 4 years. The 3 previous years, the first 3 under Brian Ferentz, they had a quarterback that was 68. They had players and they were able to run the ball effectively. They haven't been able to do that now because they don't have the linemen they did, and they don't have the quarterback. And now if they have a better passing system, I think they're going to be fine. But, to scrap it, you look at Wisconsin. Now, maybe in the future, that's the move that Iowa should make. But I think right now, I would, if I was offensive coordinator, and how I would do this a little bit differently, I would have a running quarterback. I would have somebody who could run the ball because Deacon Hill can't. They never really had anybody who can except C.J. Beathard, and that still isn't anybody great. So if they can have somebody somewhat innovative that way, more power to you. But I do think that it doesn't need to be completely scrapped. The style. It's more the system that needs to be scrapped.
I'll close with this before we move on. But you talk to really good offensive coaches. You hear two things. Every time we touch the ball, we should try to score 7. And every play should be designed to score. Doesn't have to score. You're not taking shots on every play. But like every play, you should have an attempt to score. And you watch Iowa play, and it's almost like I just don't believe they have that mindset. And I think that the thought process and how they view offense, we can argue about the second point, but if you don't believe that every time the offense takes the field, they should be trying to score 7, and that's the only thing that's good enough on that possession, you're not asking enough. You're not dreaming big enough. You're not aiming high enough. This is a problem. And I think Iowa just philosophically, has an issue there. And I think you've got to demand more. And if you're sitting there going, well, if we can just get up to 20 points a game, or if we can just, cut down our 3 and outs, it's just like, how about you try and go score every time you touch the ball? Like that's what the point of offense is. And I think it's philosophically so misaligned.